What I'm doing right now.
Okay.
All right, so I want to start off talking about this strange and interesting experience that I had with the Rocky Mountain News, who cons wanted me to consult with them to do a study of high school dropping out in Denver. And I wondered where they had heard about me, and I figured it out that back when they started using test scores as a way of evaluating schools. All the schools were required to use standardized tests, at least in Colorado, to determine whether or not students were able to read and write and do math at competent levels. And so I belong to this organization of Colorado Educational Evaluators. And we decided to do a session for journalists on the topic of using standardized test scores to evaluate schools. And so we invited um, representatives of the Denver Post, the Rocky Mountain News, the Colorado Springs Gazette, and other papers up and down the Front Range in Colorado. And I gave a presentation to them. And one of the things that I emphasized was that test scores varied a lot according to the demographics of the school. And so, for example, a measure that's often used to describe the level of income of students at a school is whether they're eligible or not for free lunch. So, in order to be eligible for a free lunch for their kids at school, the family income has to be below a certain level, and it's a pretty low level. And so, if you look at the percentage of students who are eligible for free lunch and compare that to the average fifth grade math test score in the school, you see this strong correlation that schools that don't have very many students that are poor, on average, have much higher math test scores or reading test scores than schools that have a high percentage of students that are eligible for free lunch. So I said, this doesn't seem fair that if you if you're a school that's serving high income kids and they do better in math, that you can say that you're a better school than this other one where, say, 90% of the kids enrolled are eligible for free lunch and their test scores are lower. I said, consider this thought experiment. Suppose we took the highest scoring school and the lowest scoring school and exchanged faculties. All the teachers and the principals from the highest scoring school go take over the lowest scoring school. Uh, how, how long would it take, or could ever the scores at the lowest scoring school go up? Um, Meaning that now we're interpreting them as being a good school if 90% of their students are low income. And in Denver public schools, you get extremes on this. There are schools in Denver in which 100% of the students qualify for reduced lunch. And you get others in which very few of the students qualify for, and it's all associated with neighborhood demographics. And the same would be true, for example, if you had data about the mother's educational level. In work that I've done in education, the single best predictor of how well kids are going to do in school is their mother's education level.
Hmm.
If the mother hasn't graduated from high school, the kid's much more likely to score low on a reading test than if their mother's has gone to graduate school or something. So I made the argument that it was unfair or invalid to to claim that schools with higher test scores were better schools. And the Colorado Springs Gazette was really fascinated by this argument. It had never occurred to them that the demographics of the students should matter on how well they do on these tests. And they asked me if I would consult with them because they wanted to enter this competition for outstanding journal series, newspaper series. They were going to do a series of articles, and they were going to do what I basically had suggested. They were going to, in the city of Colorado Springs, they're going to take all the elementary schools, find out the percentage of kids that were eligible for free lunch, um, make a scatter plot to show the correlation between the free lunch scores and the test scores, and then interview people about this and is it fair, and what about if we took all the teachers from the highest scoring school and switched them with the lower scores, would we predict that all of a sudden those scores would change because they now had the better teachers, or would we think no, these kids are all from poverty families and they've got uh, more chaotic lives. They're moving around more. Their mother's not reading them bedtime stories, on and on. So anyway, they did this series and they won this national award in journalism. And I didn't actually help them write anything, but I gave them these ideas. So then 5 years later, I was approached by the Rocky Mountain News, which at the time had the highest circulation of any newspaper in Denver. And they said, people from the Colorado Springs Gazette recommended that we talk to you about this thing we want to do. Want to run a series of articles about kids dropping out of high school in Denver public schools. And how do they come up with these numbers? And are they good? Are they bad? And what could we learn from this? They said, we want to run a series for an entire week. And when we launch it, we want it to be our front page. And so they said, we just have to get Denver Public Schools to turn over all their data to us. And then you can help us analyze it and we can write our series of articles. So they wrote this letter to Wayne Eckerling, who was the head of research and testing for Denver Public Schools. And they said, so you need to turn over all your data for us, for all your students, so that we can do a study on how they do in terms of graduating from high school. And Wayne Eckerling said, hell no, we're not doing this. This is private, protected information. And the newspaper said, no, to the contrary, if you don't give it to us, we're going to sue you over the Freedom of Information Act and force you to turn over the information. And we want Alan Davis to be involved in this. So then, all these alarm bells went off for me because I liked doing research in Denver public schools and didn't want to be banned as some sort of unfriendly character. So, I said, so what if we come up with a plan for how to do this and submit it to you and agree that I'll work on analyzing the data, and this guy from the newspaper will also independently analyze the data. And when we agree with each other, we'll send you what we are claiming. And then Denver Public Schools, you can verify it yourself. You can disagree with it. If there's anything there that you think would be really embarrassing to the district. You could argue that it shouldn't go in the newspaper. So the plan that I came up with was that we would take a cohort of kids and follow them for 5 years. But we would start with a cohort of kids who were in the eighth grade 5 years ago. So we'd be looking at archival data for all the eighth graders 5 years ago. And then the question is, what happened to that cohort of eighth graders? Um, we'll start with them. We'd ask the initial question, how many of them stayed in the district and were there in the ninth grade? And then that ninth grade would begin our dropout cohort. We would answer the question, what happened to all these kids when they were in the ninth grade, when they were in the 10th grade, when they were in the 11th grade, when they were in the 12th grade? And we figured that we would work on this study for a few months. And then when they graduated in at the end of, I think we started with kids who were in the eighth grade in the year 2000. When they graduated or didn't graduate in 2005, that would answer our questions about dropping out. Well, the district agreed to this. And so we started doing it. And immediately, I realized that I didn't know that much on how schools work in respect to following a cohort of kids. I mean, it turns out that in Denver Public Schools, hundreds of kids transfer into the district every year. Hundreds of kids transfer out of the district every year. So it's like a bathtub with a drain open. You've got new kids coming in, other kids leaving every year. And so the cohort shrinks pretty rapidly. So when we started off with this thing, um, let's see, um, there were 4,504 students that were in this eighth grade group that continued in the district and were ninth graders the following year. And the first thing that really shocked me was that a whole lot of these eighth graders dropped out. In other words, they didn't appear in the ninth grade, and they hadn't apparently transferred anywhere else. They had simply quit going to school after the eighth grade. And I think that at that time in Colorado, the requirement for compulsory education was you had to complete the eighth grade. You didn't have to go to high school. I think that's changed now. I think that at least some high school is compulsory. But when we looked to see who these kids were who had left school after the eighth grade and hadn't gone to the ninth grade, they were disproportionately Latina girls. And that got me really curious about what the practice is in Mexico. So I went to UNESCO data. UNESCO publishes annual data about educational completion rates for many, many countries across the globe. And it turns out that when we were doing this study, the norm in Mexico was for kids to complete the eighth grade and not to go on to high school at all. In fact, the word for high school in Mexico is preparatoria, meaning preparatory prep school, in effect. It's to prepare you to go on to college and to professions like doctor and lawyer, and that the more expected uh, pattern in that time would be that you finish the eighth grade and quit. And so, I got to thinking it also corresponded with that ceremony for Hispanic girls of quinceañera, that when they turn 15, the title goes from niña to señorita, and they're no longer a child, they're now a young woman, and they're eligible for marriage at age 15, culturally in Mexico. So, I guess it maybe in respect to that, it wasn't so surprising that there were all these Latina girls who never enrolled in the ninth grade in Denver public schools at all. So, but then we followed that cohort that did enroll in the ninth grade and followed them as they went through high school. And there's all kinds of codes for reasons that people discontinue. And one of them is death. And we found that every year some kids died. Um, and another one was expelled. So the rule was that if the district expelled you, you had not dropped out of high school, you had been forced out of high school. Another category was incarcerated. Another one was hospitalized. So all of those were reasons that kids quit school, but it was different from than dropping out. So dropping out was defined as you quit going to school and you had not transferred to any other school or transferred to any other district or any other state. Um, and so you weren't forced out, you just quit going. And so it's typical that for a high school kid, if they move to California, they're going to request a transcript so that they get credit for the work that they did in Colorado before they moved to California. So if they transfer out of state, there's a record of requesting a transcript. If they transfer from one high school to another school, or from one district in the state to another district in the state, there's evidence of a transfer. So we were finding as we did this study that it was possible to do, but it was a hell of a lot of work to figure out, all right, this kid is gone. Does he have an exit code? What is the exit code? Could we say that the kid dropped out? So we did this big study, and it's kind of fun if I can share my screen to see what it looked like. Oh, I have to go to share. I have to go to this thing. Is that what I want? No. Yeah, this is what I want. Okay. Share. Now, if I go to current slide. Okay, so we can see this, right? Good. Okay, so this is when the article broke, this was the headline of the front page of the Rocky Mountain News. 5,663 students start eighth grade. 1,884 of them graduated from Denver Public Schools. What happened? And so then they published this huge chart showing the bright red ones are the ones that dropped out. And so you've got Hispanic, and it's divided by ethnicity, Hispanic students, what are these? White students, Black students, Asian students, Native American students. And and then here's me at the end talking, writing my own little article. And they had this picture of me each day as the expert. And down in the bottom right here is about the expert. Alan Davis is an associate professor of research and evaluation methodology at the School of Education at the University of Colorado. And so I don't know, I was getting a certain amount of notoriety in Denver for this week-long newspaper thing. But I want to quit sharing it. How do I do that? Um, Maybe if I go here, I can stop share. Uh, I'm not good at this. Oh, shoot. How do I stop my share?
There should be a stop share button in the top. I think it's green, just a little tiny bar that says stop share on your picture.
Uh,
How about I'm looking over on the far right, there's an orange box that says share.
oh, yeah.
Does that do anything?
Uh, well,
I'm afraid I can't help you out because I don't see what you're seeing. Ah, there you go.
good. Okay. So, another interesting thing that I learned from doing this study was that as students start to fall behind,
Alan, before you do that, can you summarize what that very complicated chart? Can you summarize any of the conclusions that were displayed in that chart?
well, uh, the group with the largest dropout rate were the Hispanic students. Um, the second was the Black students. The white students had a fairly alarming dropout rate, but it was less than the other two. At that time, there were very few Asian and just a handful of Native American students in the district. So I don't think we could tell much from that. I would say that since that time, the demographics have remained pretty similar, except that in recent years, Asian students have outperformed white students on a graduation rate. Um, what one thing that I learned from that data is that as students and it doesn't, I mean, actually the kinds of things that show up in that chart um, have to be interpreted in ways that just looking at the numbers themselves is really not very helpful. Um, One of the things that I learned from doing this study was that as students begin to fall behind on credits and start to worry that they're not going to be able to graduate on time, they tend to transfer to another high school. They think, well, I'm not making it here. I'm going to go over to George Washington High School instead. And sometimes the parents will move, or sometimes the parents will just lie and say, well, they actually live, we did move and they live in this neighborhood now, so they can attend that high school. So uh, it was clear that it was sort of unfair to assign a dropout rate to a particular high school, meaning that that was the high school they were attending when they actually dropped out. They quit going to school. If you look back and they had attended two other high schools before that, and they were losing credits there as well, who's to take the blame for this? Um, and Another thing that I learned was that graduation rate and dropout rate are different ideas. You can't say that if you take the graduation rate and add the dropout rate, it'll add up to 100%. Because as long as you haven't dropped out, you may be in your 5th year of high school, you may be in your 6th year of high school, you still haven't dropped out. But as soon as you graduate, then that's a graduation rate for that high school. And I'm sure that the high school doesn't follow a cohort to make sure that, I mean, I think they just take as their graduation rate the percentage of seniors that year that graduated. And so it is super simplified over looking at the whole cohort over a period of 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. I mean, some of these kids take 6 years to graduate from high school. It turns out to be a really complex phenomenon. Um, well, as a consequence of this study, I managed to actually stay in good graces with the district. I mean, the district actually acknowledged that they had learned valuable things from the study and that it had been fair, it had been based on data. And so, you know, after that, the state came up with much more formalized definitions and methods for calculating dropout rate and graduation rate. And not soon after that, too, I was uh, instrumental in starting a partnership, a research partnership between the School of Education at the university and the Denver Public Schools. And I took one sabbatical I took to work as a researcher in residence with Denver Public Schools. So I went over to their office and instead of going to my office every day, and got really pretty close to the people who ran the Department of Testing and Evaluation. And they were knowledgeable people. They had expertise, and they had some students who were graduate students from Harvard University that were doing on some data analyses in education project. So as I remained, I thought my interaction with Denver Public Schools was very rewarding um, the whole time that I was a university professor. Um, so about the same time, I mean, literally at the same time that this Rocky Mountain News thing was going on, I had a grant to study students' engagement in school. And I had spent 3 years at Smiley Middle School working at my after school club and making our digital stories and stuff that I talked about earlier. And then I left that school to work at an alternative high school in Denver called PS1 at the Spot. And so the PS1 came from the New York City way of naming their schools. But the Spot was also some sort of a club for youth in a predominantly Black neighborhood of Denver. And so this high school, PS1 in Denver, created this alternative high school with some of their faculty going to this place called the Spot and running this small school for, I would say, a total of about 30 students. And I got permission from the Black teachers that ran that school to come and assist and do research. They were pretty hostile about the idea of a Black guy, I mean, a white guy doing research on Black students in predominantly Black school. But again, I said, I'm here to collaborate. I'm here to work with you. I'll ask permission for each thing that I want to do, and you can supervise me as I do it. And they agreed. And one of the first things that I learned was that the black teacher woman who taught English had kids doing an autobiography project. And I asked if I could read some of the autobiographies. So she invited me to her class. I asked the students if they would let me read their autobiographies. And they were excited to have somebody interested in reading their autobiographies. So they all let me read them. And I was really struck about two things. One was these autobiographies seemed authentic. I mean, I kind of assumed that if you asked kids, especially kids who had dropped out of high school, to write an autobiography, that they would give you this kind of wooden, abbreviated thing that was pretty superficial. These things were not superficial. But the other thing that I really noticed about them is they didn't mention school at all. It was all about their family relations, how they were getting along with their mother, what happened when their grandmother died and the whole family sort of collapsed, what happened when they moved from this neighborhood to that other neighborhood. And so I said, so I would like to have anybody in this class who's interested to meet with me and to go through your autobiography and have me ask you in a chronological way, well, what was going on at school at that time? And we'll start with you're in elementary school. Okay, so you're 6 and you're going to school. What was it like? How did you feel about it? Did you like it? And so I got 6 of these kids to agree to do that with me. And we recorded our sessions and we did go chronologically. And what emerged was practically everybody liked elementary school and they liked their teacher and they enjoyed going to school and they felt that they were learning how to read and do some math and it was good. And then they get into middle school and all of a sudden everything's about popularity and you've got to have your group and you've got to worry about who's going to eat lunch with you and you start uh, worrying about your grades, and your grades are good in some subjects and bad in some subjects, but you're getting by okay in school. But what you're really focused on is that there's this group of girls that hates you, and you're in a different group of girls, and this one group of girls says, we're going to fight you. And so you all march over to the park across from the school, and you think the teachers are going to come and get you and pull you back, but instead the teachers ignore you. You go over and you're fighting each other and you're pulling hair and hitting each other. And then one group, all of a sudden, police car comes up and one group runs and the other group doesn't run and they get arrested and so all these crazy things are happening. And then when they get into high school, this stuff gets serious, that all of a sudden these credits are counting toward graduation and they failed this class. And how am I going to make it up? Because it's a required course. I failed my English class and I don't know what to do. Should I go to summer school or what? And so they they start moving from the high school that they hate to this, and where they're not in the right group and are not wearing the right clothes or playing the right sport. And they go to this other school, and it's instead of being better, it's way worse because they don't know anybody there. And so they and the 2 other friends that transferred with them are this little group, but they're getting beat up on the playground, and it's just becomes awful. And so then they're missing class more often, and a couple of these boys said, I won't do work for a teacher that doesn't respect me. And that science teacher, he didn't respect me at all. So I wouldn't do anything in science. And I'm saying, Yeah, but I don't think that hurts him really. It just hurts you. You get an F in science and he forgets your name, and says, good riddance. And they're saying, I don't care. I won't do any work for a teacher that doesn't respect me, as a kind of defiant thing. Uh, so they end up, and then there's the culminating experience, like the kid who wouldn't do any work for a teacher who didn't respect him. He's really into drawing. Art is his forte. He works for days on a pencil drawing to make it just perfect. And he's sitting in the back row of this class, and he's got his English book open, and he's pretending to read along while he's actually working on his drawing. And the teacher walks back to the back of the class, sees the picture, grabs it, rumples it up, throws it in the trash. The kid says, I've been working on that for 3 days. The teacher says, I don't want you goofing off doing art in the back of my class. The kid stands up and says, fuck you. And the teacher says, all right, I'm taking you to the principal. The kid says, you're never going to see me again. I'm not coming back to this shithole school. And, and that's the day he drops out of school. So you think, okay, there's no one reason to why did this kid drop out of school? There's always this culminating story that has a strong social peer dimension to it, a strong relationship thing about being respected by the teacher. Um, does the teacher know me? Is the teacher trying to actually engage me in this subject? And, I came across saying the right question is not why did this kid drop out of school? The right question is how did this kid drop out of school? And it has to be answered by a story. I mean, there's this long story that explains why this all makes sense that the kid ended up dropping out of high school. So I wrote about that, and I felt my experience with the students at the spot was good, and these autobiographies that they'd written, I wanted to publish them as a book, with the stories. I mean, these kids had written autobiographies that on average were about 20 pages long. So, the thing put six of them in a book, and so I went back to the two teachers that had allowed me to work there and said, these, I learned a ton from these stories. And I think that people who teach in urban high schools would really come to a better understanding of their students if they could read these stories. And they said, no, Alan, every Black family knows these stories. They don't have to read them in a book. The only people who are going to read a book like that are going to be white people and they're going to say, oh my God, these Black people are more fucked up than we thought. And so we don't need that. And we don't want that. And so, no, you can't publish a book. So I've got all these stories languishing on my computer. They're just great. And I, uh, I think everybody should read them, but it can't happen. Um, how much time do we have? We got, I want to talk about one more thing, and that was that all in working in all these places, I got alarmed by the number of Black boys who said they wanted to be professional athletes, that their goal in life was to become a professional athlete, either a football player or a basketball player. And meanwhile, there was this irony that they were not going out for that sport, or necessarily excelling in that sport. Certainly not in middle school, but sometimes not in high school either. And so I thought, yeah, I'm just really interested in the career aspirations of these kids and whether there are any systematic differences in career aspirations that are associated with race or gender. And so I started doing a review of literature on that topic, and I could not find anything. I kept finding studies that said there is no evidence that occupational aspirations are related to either race or gender. And I thought, well, that's got to be bullshit. I mean, my everyday experience indicates to me that Hispanic kids think that becoming a construction worker would be a good thing if you're a boy. And if you're Black, becoming a construction worker is not on your list of possibilities. You think, well, I don't want to do that. And who wants to work in an office? I think white kids aspire to jobs where you work in an office, but I'm not sure that Black or Latino kids do. So anyway, I was able to survey um, 662 ninth graders in Denver Public Schools. And I just asked one question. List 3 jobs that you might try to have after you finish your education. And so it turns out that the Department of Labor scores every imaginable occupation that they've heard of in terms of its general education demand, or GED. And so if you say you want to be a surgeon, then that's kind of the highest educational demand. You have to have several years of graduate school. But if you say, I want to be a waitress, then there's no educational demand. And if some things have a high school diploma as an educational demand and so on. So I scored these jobs that they rated in terms of their educational demand. And I also had them identify their ethnicity and their gender. So there were some huge, I don't know that they were surprising to me, but I think they were extremely surprising to the literature. One was that 40% of Black ninth grade boys listed professional athlete as one of their 3 aspired to jobs. I discovered that Latina women had the highest educational demand of the jobs that they aspired to, and that Latino boys had the lowest educational demand to the jobs that they aspired to. And that was because the girls all wanted to be in helping professions. They wanted to be pediatricians. They wanted to direct preschools. They wanted to be nurses. They wanted to help people. And most of those helping jobs required you to have a college degree. They wanted to be social workers. But the Latino boys wanted to work outside with equipment. Um, they wanted to drive trucks, build buildings, build houses. Um, and most of those had low educational demands. And that has just been borne out at the university level. I mean, our enrollment, we have a lot of Black women students, but practically no Black male students. I'm not talking about School of Education. I'm talking about the university as a whole. Has very few, University of Colorado Denver has few Black male students, lots of Black female students. And for Latina, it's the same thing. A lot more Latina women, university students than Latino male. And with white, it's more balanced. So anyway, I just could not get this thing published. I wrote up the paper. I thought it was methodologically good. I thought it was really supported by data. it was rejected by everybody. And I think, I mean, I finally got it published, but I had to go to a journal where the editor was a friend of mine and say, would you please take a look at this thing? I know that your journal doesn't specifically talk about occupations and career development, but it does talk about minority youth and stuff. So anyway, it got published, but it's hardly ever been cited. I really think that I crossed a line, that I concluded stuff that is politically unacceptable to scholarly journals. That you cannot say that 41% of ninth grade black boys want to be professional athletes. It's just not allowable. And at Smiley, when I did a survey of kids' aspirations, the principal rejected it. He says, "You're asking my kids whether they want to be a teacher. They don't want to be a teacher. They want to be president of the United States. They want to be a millionaire CEO of a company. Those are the kinds of things you should be asking them." And I'm thinking, I don't think anybody from the school's ever done anything remotely like that. But I don't know. So, end of story.
Man, Alan,
What
I
a
gotta say,
story.
I'm blown away by several levels of this. First of all, your dedication to something that is a serious problem, and you're addressing it with a scientific mindset, trying to find out answers rather than political slogans. And it was just very impressive. All of it was fascinating to me. And I'm sorry you ran up against a stone wall getting it published because it sounds all really great to me. The only comment I have is that thing about respect. I ran into the same thing teaching at San Quentin. I couldn't believe it. The very first assignment I gave was a bunch of logic problems in a book, and so I said, okay, do these 5 logic problems, and we'll talk about them next time. So they showed up, and I said, okay, who's got the answer to number 1? And some guy raised his hand, and he just read the question, and he goes, well, I don't know. It could be uh, maybe. Let me see. He just had no idea. And so I said, um, so no idea. Is there somebody that actually did the work and has an idea? Well, that was enough that he never attended class again. He was so insulted that I would disrespect him in that way. I'm going, are you guys fucking babies? I mean, that was a very mild criticism I gave to you, and he couldn't take it. He couldn't handle it. I went, geez, do I have to teach you like a 3-year-old? But that's what I ran into in prison, and these guys were, now I don't want to generalize, but my impression was there was a general level of undevelopment. They just didn't have any tools to deal with anything, and the only solution was to be angry or just get out of there. They didn't have actually do the work. No, even joke with the teacher. No, it was like anyway. Enough said. But when you described the disrespect, I I thought, yeah, that's not a grown up behavior. You're gonna get disrespected for Christ's sake. I don't care what you do. Get over
Right.
yourself. Anyway, thank you, Alan. That was very I gotta say again, I'm very impressed.
Thanks a lot, Tony.
Okay, Alan, I was making little notes the whole time we were going because there were so many things that I experienced when I was teaching. But just regarding the last thing you were talking about, I think it was NPR. I was hearing a really interesting series about the corollary of the educated Black women and the lack of educated Black men was the difficulty that the Black women found in finding partners, and that it was a real sociological difficulty. Sometimes they married people of other races that were educated. And sometimes they got into relationships that turned out to just not work out, that it added to the problem with Black marriages lasting. So I think that's, a really important um, a consideration that spills over into other sociological issues. And then regarding the word respect, Tony, I think you and I think it means one thing, and I discovered kids think it means something else. You and I think that somebody respects somebody because they earned our respect by behaving in a certain way. That's not what kids think. I remember when my daughter Mariah got arrested for drunkenness in the county park, and taken to jail, and I had to come take her out. She was complaining to me that the jail guards didn't show her respect. And I said, "What were you doing that would earn their respect?" Sort of a question. And I realized with my students, especially, um, I remember in Fauché Junior High, which was a totally Black junior high near at USC that it was my first student teaching job. The kids used the term respect as a code for an excuse to fight. You're not showing me respect. I'm going to beat you up. Meaning you're not lowering it was more of you were talking about mammalian behavior. It was when you approach me, you should be lowering your eyes. You should not ever talk back to me. That's, it was more of I'm the alpha male and you have to show me respect. So that's just two things that I noticed.
I think it's an important topic, and I think it's a real complex topic too. I mean, I just spent the weekend with a couple of people who are autistic, and you know, I was careful to, I think all of us in the group were careful to always be respectful toward them, even though they talk in ways that are, you know, different. They're accustomed to kids making fun of them, or they can be. Um, but I think we all assume that they're have a certain inherent worth as a human being that you have to respect that. Um,
Alan,
yeah.
yeah. I just, as background, I taught sixth grade for 4 years in a small rural town in Mendocino County. I'm part of a Title VII program, so I had a cluster of Native American Pomo Indian kids in my class every year that had been gathered from the district and collected to this one classroom. So a couple things. Number one, kudos to you for taking your academic training and your analytic abilities and applying them to real world situations and getting out of the academic ivory tower into the real working world to see what was really going on. And kudos to you for the Digital Stories Project, which supports something that I found, which is I found that my students related much more strongly to things that were relevant to their world. And I used their writings as reading tools rather than spending time in textbooks where they didn't have any interest in what was being discussed there. So kudos for that. And one comment, I'll just throw a question out, but I want to finish a couple of statements. One, I'm wondering whether the Digital Stories Project was replicated anywhere, because it seems to me to have a lot of potential value beyond just the model project you did. But let me just go on and say that one of the things that came across to me in your talk that I also saw in my teaching experience is that school, not only the curriculum, but the structure of school is very different from the structure of kids' lived lives. And those who are more comfortable with it come from a suburban, white, middle class, or upper class background. And because the schools are embodying a value system and a structure that is comfortable for that milieu. But the students who come from minority populations, in my case, I was seeing a lot of Indian, Pomo Indian students and also some Black students because the People's Temple was bringing students into that area, urban Black students, that their social and cultural worlds are not compatible with the social structure or academic structure of the classroom. So my question to you is, so I came to the conclusion that the grading system and the measurement system that was typically used in the traditional classrooms were simply reinforcing rewarding the students who already had that value system and penalizing those who didn't and who couldn't relate to it. So I dispensed with grades. And I also believe that a lot of studies show that expectations of a student have a lot to do with how they perform. If they're coming in with low reading levels and math levels, their expectations are low. And if the teacher reinforces those expectations by giving them poor grades because their achievement is low, that's the level they'll achieve to. But if the expectations are different, students will perform differently. So it struck me that there's something flawed in the entire structure of traditional education in these kind of multi-ethnic communities. So I'd like you to talk to that a little bit. And also I'd be interested in your view about charter schools as a way to maybe find some alternatives to a traditional model.
You know, in respect to digital storytelling, it's the kind of thing that has to be, to be valuable, it has to be authentic, and there's always personal risk involved. And so, you know, the times that I've seen it employed as a classroom learning activity that's going to be graded, it's fallen short because the kids are trying to figure out what the teacher wants them to say rather than what they authentically need to say about themselves. Um, One exception to that I read about was this Hispanic woman teaching a course on Hispanic portrayals of Hispanic women's lives. And so they were reading books by Hispanic women, about Hispanic women, and then they made a digital story of their own lives to share with each other in the class. And that came out, you know, rated by the students as a very valuable experience. But the students in the class were all Hispanic women too. I mean, it was really designed to be supportive of them and their lives. And it was a class requirement, so I assume it was graded. But you know, I think the grading system undermines this sort of thing. That's why I've only done it in after school settings where nothing was graded at all. You know, it was not evaluated. It was that we would sit and help the kid think it through, but not say, you know, this is good and that's not so good. Um, but the other part of what you were saying about cultural mixing, man, it really strikes me in respect to Indian education, Native American education. I mean, here were people that never had such a thing as a school. I mean, they would pass on culture to youth, typically in quasi-ceremonial settings around a campfire in the dark at certain times of the year. You would tell certain kinds of stories, you know, and kids were trained on horsemanship and you know, killing buffalo from a running horse and things like that before they encountered white people. But all of a sudden, white people are saying, well, you need to learn how to read and write, but you have no written language. No book has ever been written in your language. So, you know, income linguists to develop an alphabetic structure I mean, there's a couple of tribes like the Cherokee that developed their own writing system, but practically all the rest of them, it was missionaries or university linguists that developed their a way of transcribing their language, and you know, the whole thing has no place in the traditional culture. And you know, in my experience, turning it over to native control hasn't made it any less foreign to the kids. And boy, you know, so I've never seen Native American education done well. Um, uh, at the secondary level. And there's this guy named Ogbu who is a Nigerian anthropologist who came to the United States and said, well, why are these black kids not doing well in school? In Nigeria, black kids do fine in school. It doesn't have to do with being black. It has to do with the relationship of the community to schooling. And so Agbu came up with this theory that there were voluntary immigrants and involuntary immigrants. And if you'd been enslaved or if you'd been conquered, you were an involuntary immigrant, so to speak. I mean, you are a minority within your own country, not by choice. You didn't choose to come here. And that the teenagers in particular will view the school as uh, uh, an agent of the conqueror trying to change them, and that they'll sort of organize a resistance. And at Smiley Middle School, for example, I would encounter some indications of that. For example, kids who would raise their hand in class and volunteer to answer teachers' questions would be kids would come up to them after in the hall and say, "You're acting white." And that phrase, acting white, meant that you were trying to please the teacher. And so I don't know. I I think that studies have been done with Latino immigrant kids, Latino immigrants whose families moved to the United States because they're creating opportunities for the family and for their children, and they're telling the children that those kids do better in school and on tests than Hispanic families who have been here for a longer period of time and don't think of themselves as immigrants looking for opportunity, but rather a minority that's being prejudiced against. And a lot of research has been done on that. It's been confirmed over and over that immigrant kids from Mexico will perform better in school than kids who are Mexican but born in the United States and don't have that parental message that, hey, we came here for you, so take advantage of it. Um, I don't know, Barry, if I touched on things that you're talking about, but it's, you know, another thing related to that is the lack of ethnic teachers, especially male teachers. I mean, I can't tell you how many university students I've heard about who take a course from a Latino professor and say, "You're the first black Hispanic that's ever taught me." Black, I mean, start over. You're the first Hispanic male who's ever taught me, a Hispanic male. All my teachers, none of them, they were either Hispanic women or they were white women. But to be taught by a Hispanic male is a new experience for me, and I love it. And you know, you talk about black males, they're just hardly in the schools that I've worked in, hardly any black male teachers. And I think that's a problem. Ooh, yeah,
I just
Jan.
I just wanted to say I would love for you to publish those biographies, autobiographies. I think that would be so fascinating. I don't know if you'd have to get permission from the people, but I would just absolutely love it.
I'll send
I
you
had
one,
I
Jim.
had a friend, Lynn Jacobs, who taught in a really impoverished Hispanic school, junior high. In fact, it was the school that got a gunman, Lyndhurst gunman came and shot people. She had a kid die in her arms. But she did this great project where she had the kids write their autobiographies, and they knew it was going to be published in a real book that would be given to their families. And so they worked really, and that was the grade, basically. It was going to be published. And then they would work and work and work on rewriting and figuring out why you can't use, how to work the grammar so that it would be in its very best form. And she wrote it up in one of the educational journals. It was a big success.
Yeah,
Yep.
Alan, I mean, publishing a book, you just do it. Uh, Now, getting a publisher behind you to do a lot of PR and so forth. Alice Feller, Fred's wife, just published a book, and she had a publisher, but it was kind of an academic publisher, and it's also very important, I think, a very important subject, but she hadn't been able to corral much interest in it, marketing wise, so it really helps to have a publisher. But actually getting it published, I bet the kids would be thrilled to see their stories in print. I bet they'd just be so excited, and I bet they'd all sign off on it. And you never know what'll happen to it.
I got the kids to sign off on it.
Okay, but I mean,
But yeah,
don't you think they'd be thrilled, Alan, to see their own story in a printed book?
I don't know. I mean,
No?
well, this is they're all, adults now who are got children of their own that might be embarrassed actually for their children to some of these things that they were doing. But the other thing is there's a standard for academia that's really different than the standard for journalism. I mean, I've been so jealous of journalists who interviewed, for example, three girls in Denver Public High School, and two of them were, I think one of them was a citizen, one of them was a DACA student who had uh, been granted the the ability to live in the United States without having legal status in her family. And but anyway, these girls did great in high school, and now it's time to go to college. And the two who were not citizens uh, couldn't complete the application. I mean, they were uh, so worried about providing information that could result in their parents being deported to Mexico. And it was a very powerful, well-written story, but an academician can't do something like that. You can't reveal the name of the school, the name of the city. I mean, everything has to be so anonymous. Um, Not only do you have to have permission, but you've got you can't say this happened at George Washington High School in Denver, Colorado. It's the rule of anonymity.
I would just comment too, and I used a lot of student writing in my classes, and there were some sensitivities for a number of things. But students sometimes would reveal things about their home life that their parents were not comfortable with having revealed.
Yeah,
And I had some parents come in and complain, why was I doing this? Because what I would do is I would have them do a first draft of their story, whatever might be a theme we were working on, or it might just be an open-ended write about whatever you want kind of assignment. Then I would go through and I would transcribe them, and I would make grammatical changes and corrections so that they were more correct grammatically, and then print them out so that they looked more like little books rather than student written things, and then use them as reading material for that particular student. I was doing individualized instruction. And one of the things I noticed is a lot of the students who were very low achieving reading comprehension students really took to this because they didn't, up until then, they didn't understand that reading was just talk written down.
Yeah.
And here all of a sudden their own story looked
Yeah.
like a book, looked like it's something they might read in a textbook. And they were very excited about that. So I would keep building on these things and make these books bigger and bigger, but they were individualized for each student. But it worked out very well as a reading comprehension tool.
Yeah. I I came by those ideas late in my teaching experience at that level. When I was teaching kids in San Luis, man, their own personal stories would have been great for things for them to read. Instead, I was struggling mightily to get anything that they would read. Is
Well,
there
I
any?
had a lot more freedom because of this Title VII project that I was allowed to innovate
Yeah,
the
yeah.
curriculum. I also did a
Oh,
lot with poetry. There was a book by Kenneth Koch about uh, different formats for children's poetry. Like, for example, one was a poem where every line was a lie, was untrue. Or every line was "I once was, but now I am." It was like a Mad Lib, and so
yeah,
these were formats for poems, and my kids just went crazy with this stuff. They would do poem after poem. They loved writing the lie poems where they just made up everything had to be untrue, and their way of doing that was interesting. I also did a lot with. I used Viola Spolin's book of improvisation for the theater, and used theater games a lot of things that we did that were very helpful and students really took to also. So because I wasn't using the standard curriculum, I was forced to develop pretty much an alternative curriculum for all the subject areas,
How,
which is what got me interested in curriculum development. But yeah,
how old
it
were
was
your students, Barry?
sixth grade. They were 11 and 12-year-olds. Now, but one of the interesting things is they were having so much fun in the classroom and they were up and around and they were communicating with each other. They weren't sitting at their desks doing worksheets all day. And their biggest concern was that I wasn't getting them ready for junior high because they saw the classroom across the street, across the hallway that was sitting at their desk taking tests all day and doing workbook pages. And they thought, well, that's what school's about supposed to be. When
yeah,
that I had to basically educate them to the fact that they were actually learning by the things that they were doing because they had basically internalized the idea that the school format of quiet sitting at your desk, teacher at the front of the class and in front of the blackboard, that was learning, and what we were doing was too much fun to be learning. But of course, at the end of the year, my students did just as well, if not better, than the other students in the standardized tests. So you know.
So there.
you know, I met my wife when she was teaching at a Navajo school on the Navajo reservation, and this wasn't going on when we were there, but a couple of years later, they developed this project and they got funding for it, where they had the high school kids interview their grandparents or their parents about some traditional thing, like how to build a hogan or how to bless a hogan or how to make shampoo from the roots of a yucca plant. And so they put out this magazine called Saazi. And I think it came, I think it came out once a month, and it was good. Some of these stories were written in Navajo, some of them were English and Navajo, but you know, I think it was motivating to the kids to go and interview, their ancestors, their like grandparents about stuff like that, and write it up, and then have be it published like in a pamphlet. And I've got a whole bunch of those sitting in my bookshelves that I don't know what to do with. I think that I could take them back to that school, but I don't, I don't know.
Alan,
Yeah.
I feel like we have a lot more things to discuss. Are we, is there any more time for another day to continue discussing these things?
Uh,
Well, I'd be up for that. We're scheduled. I think Otis, you're up next. Is that correct? But can you see?
Yeah, I am up. I'd be happy. Actually, I waited to do a lot of my prep, thinking this might happen. So I'd be happy for another session to
Okay.
yeah,
warm
but
up.
I don't
Yeah,
want
The other thing
reprieve.
the other thing I'd really like to talk about, I like that idea of one more session. I'd like to talk about the adolescent girls in particular, and phones and the internet and social media and issues around that, what's going on with cases of depression numbers and suicide numbers and so on. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that with you, Alan, as well.
All right, so let's agree then that next time we will continue with education, and Alan and Barry and anybody else that wants to educate us. And I'll cut off the recording now, but look forward to seeing you next time. And of course, invite anybody else not only to join us, but also to offer some kind of presentation of their own. That would be great. So I'm going to cut off the recording, and let me do that.